Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 290, Grief, Sadness, and Joy, Lessons from Inside Out 2. Hey there. How you doing? It's the middle of December. How you doing? It probably depends on how far out you are from your loss, and I'm sure there are a myriad of circumstances in your life that are different this year than they used to be last year. But I just want you to know, from me to you, you're gonna get through it. You're gonna get through it. If this month is hard, I get it. I hear you. You can do hard things, to borrow a phrase from another podcast I love, right? If you think about all the things you've already been through and you're still going, sometimes we forget to do that. We forget to remind ourselves. We get so focused on not wanting what's ahead of us, we forget what we've already been through. And I think now is a good time to pause and remind yourself of what you've already been through, that you have handled all of it. And here you are, still going. So I just wanted to say that before we jump into this episode. So last week, I did an episode on Disney Pixar's Inside Out and what we learn from my perspective in that movie about grief and sadness and joy. And this week, I want to talk about Inside Out 2. Of course, if you have not seen the movies, go watch the movies. I will not do them justice, and they will make so much more sense. The podcast will make so much more sense once you've seen the movies. So for sure, go watch them first. If you haven't done that, you can probably stream them on Disney Plus. And then come back and listen. All right, so Inside Out 2, the long awaited Inside Out 2. I was so excited to see this movie, and I loved it so much. I ended up doing a retreat for my master's members with the whole theme of Inside Out. It was amazing. It's amazing what you can do with a good theme and how you can take that and apply it to your own life and explore things that resonate with you and learn things about yourself. And so we just had the very best time. So today I just want to go through what I see as the main takeaways from Inside Out 2 and some of the parallels between grief and puberty, which really weren't part of the movie, but I could just see them so clearly. And so I wanted to share them with you. So the first Inside Out movie is really about, learning that all emotions have value, that we just don't want any one emotion running the show. Joy thinks she's superior, and we learn that no, actually sadness is amazing, right? So much wouldn't be possible without sadness, and they all work together. And so we've already talked about that. But Inside Out 2 introduces new characters, right? And it introduces the idea of not just core memories, but core beliefs and how they form. And so, of course, the whole movie starts with Riley entering puberty. And what I noticed is that so much of Riley's puberty experience is similar to our grief experience. I want to give you a few things that I noticed in our master's retreat. We actually went way deeper than this. But for the purpose of a podcast to make it valuable for you, let's think about this, right? So puberty. Everything's going fine. All the characters are asleep. All of a sudden they hear this horrible noise in the middle of the night. And we find out that Riley has entered puberty, right? The construction crew shows up, and all of a sudden, the dashboard doesn't work the way that it used to. And it's kind of unexpected chaos. I wish someone had prepared me for grief the way that my mother had prepared me for puberty. I realize not everyone's mother prepared them for puberty, but mine did a pretty good job. I was pretty prepared for it. But here's kind of what we see with Riley and how it relates to grief. So all of a sudden, Riley is incredibly emotionally volatile, right? We see this scene where some of the characters just barely touch the control board, and Riley is over the top angry or weeping, just having extreme emotional volatility that she is not used to. Puberty just unleashes these mood swings and unexpected, intense feelings that just feel like you're on a roller coaster. And doesn't grief do the same? Waves of sadness, waves of anger, confusion, and sometimes very little warning. And given that we usually, have this experience when we're adults, or at least those of you listening to this podcast, we're talking about an experience that we have when we're adults, it doesn't make a whole lot of intellectual sense sometimes, because you have not known yourself to be an emotionally volatile person. You have not known yourself to have this depth of sadness or this depth of anger. And yet, here it is, right? You have known yourself to be stable. I don't mean that in like a clinical sense, right? I just mean like relatively predictable. And then, holy cow, the volatility, right? Because everything in our hormones are all off, just like they are in puberty. Everything's out of whack. We're not sleeping. It's just chaos. So Riley's going through that emotional volatility, and so do we in grief. Your sense of self gets disrupted. That happens with Riley, right? Her world is kind of upended. She's trying to figure out who she is. Who she thought she was is not who she's now acting like. Right? She's trying to fit in with this new hockey team. She's not treating her friends with the same kindness that she used to. She kind of doesn't recognize herself. She's not sure who she is. She is trying to figure out who she is. And something very similar happens in grief when you lose your spouse, your person. Your identity overlapped with theirs. You saw yourself and them as one in many ways. Your brain literally did this, right? That there was you and there was them, and then they overlapped and there became an us. And now that us isn't there anymore. And so we're trying to figure out, who am I now? And it can be so easy to think that you don't know who you are. I've had so many women say, I don't know who I am. I do think to an extent, I don't think we want to fight that thought, right? Of course, like you've never been in this place. You don't know yourself here. And also, there are many things about you that you do know. And we're learning new things about ourselves. We're experiencing new things. We're figuring out what the next version of us will be. And the same thing happens in puberty. In some ways, Riley's experience in Inside Out 2 is about saying goodbye to what was. Right? She's leaving her childhood behind. She's leaving these two friends behind that have been such good friends to her because they'll be going to different schools. And so she's having to kind of reconcile that of how do I say goodbye to that part of my life and then move into this new part? And what is it to do that? And that's what we go through. Right? We're saying goodbye to something that maybe I'm not saying it's always just kittens and roses, right? Sometimes there are many things about what we're saying goodbye to that we actually feel relief around no longer having to deal with. And then also there are some things that we don't want to say goodbye to that we feel forced, like we have to say goodbye to. And that's hard. It's just hard. It's hard for Riley. It's hard for us. And just like in Inside Out 2, Riley's relationships are challenged. Our relationships are often challenged in grief. Right? Riley's trying to figure out, how do I relate to my parents? How do I relate to these old friends? How do I relate to these people who I want to be my friends and I want, to impress them? Who, do I even know who I am, right? My relationship with myself. And all of her relationships start to feel different and challenging. And we go through that in grief. Every relationship might have its own flavor. Some relationships might be more challenging than others, but we definitely have to refigure out how to relate to people. And sometimes they don't know how to relate to us and they don't know how to support us. Sometimes we are their worst nightmare. They handle us with kid gloves, get all awkward and weird around us. They don't know how to relate to us, and we don't really know how to relate to them. And that's hard. And it happens both in puberty and in grief. Also, there's this aspect of feeling so out of control in puberty that we see with Riley that I think we experience in grief too. Right? Where the emotions they are just big and they feel scary and unpredictable. And it can be really hard in grief too. It's like, am I ever going to feel like a normal human again, like I used to feel? I don't know. If I let myself feel this, will I fall in a hole? Will I ever be able to come out, or will it swallow me? I don't know. And I have so much compassion for myself in early grief, for you, for all of us, right? Who just really weren't taught how to feel feelings or how to navigate them. As prepared as I think my mom tried to help me be for puberty, I definitely didn't know how to feel feelings. I didn't understand how to support myself. And a lot of us have that same experience in grief. And then there's the aspect of what we believe about ourselves. In the case of Inside Out 2, it's Riley's core beliefs. Right? It's all the things you have thought about yourself and who you are in the world and what your relationship to the world is like. Seem like they're up for grabs. And it's really unsettling. And it's really uncomfortable. And it can be very scary. And also, I see it as a tremendous opportunity to grow. Not that growth is superior, not that you should grow, but simply because you can. I would say, percentage-wise, I don't know, maybe 70%. I'll have to ask some of my clients what they think, if they agree with me on this or not. But when I think about the amount of coaching that I do with widows, I would say about 70%-ish is them starting to challenge beliefs about themselves that they have carried for a long time. Mostly, they didn't know they were optional. Mostly, they just picked them up through lived experience, sometimes like bad pennies, and carried them around. And now, because they're in a grief program and a coaching program, they're starting to see that they don't have to keep believing things about themselves that aren't useful to them and don't help them. That it's an option. It's a choice. They get to make it. And they didn't really know that. Or maybe they did know it, but they just never made time for it. And then loss comes along and it's like the record scratches and stops. And we look around dazed and confused and at a certain point decide, okay, I think I want to make some changes. Okay, I think I want to do something different with this next chapter. And a lot of that has to do with core beliefs. Sometimes it has to do with confidence too. Sometimes we experience such a rupture almost of our confidence that we have to do that work and figure it out. And we didn't have to do that work before because the person that we were with did such a great job of cheerleading us. And maybe we drew a lot of confidence from kind of our shared identity and this idea that we would be doing life together, and now we're not. And here we are. And are we good enough? And so that happens. I'll talk more about Riley's journey on that and what I think we can learn from it. But I think that's a really common thing. It happens in puberty and it happens in grief. And then I also think it's a good takeaway or parallel that just like puberty is not linear, grief isn't either. Right? It's like hot mess express. All here, there, everywhere. It's not just point A to B to C to D, right? It's lots of confusing moments and false starts and spinning around in circles and 2 steps back and 1 step forward. And it doesn't feel like you're going anywhere as quickly or as efficiently as you possibly could, and that therefore something must be amiss. But really, that's just growth. That's just the way it is. Grief is that way. Puberty is that way. It would be nice if it was nice and neat and linear. But it just isn't, because being a human is messy. So those are some of the parallels I saw between grief and puberty. I have a much longer list, but we'll leave it there. And hopefully you'll find value in that. A couple of other things that we see in Inside Out 2. One is we see the introduction of, a few different characters, but anxiety specifically. Anxiety is probably the one that we see the most of. And anxiety kind of comes in and takes over. And so we see her explain that, fear protects Riley from the things that she can see, and anxiety protects Riley from the things she can't. And so anxiety is constantly playing this chess game in her head of trying to be, 5 moves ahead of every different scenario that could happen in Riley's life, and trying to control, right? To keep Riley safe from all the dangers that could potentially happen in the future. And holy cow, do we have that in grief? There's another parallel, right? Oh my gosh. If you didn't have anxiety before, don't feel like there's something wrong with you if you have it now, because it's so common, right? Worry about the future. And it makes sense, and it in a way is protective, right? Anxiety tries to keep us safe by alerting us to potential future dangers. And so it's not a problem so much that it's there. I definitely don't want us to look at it like it's a problem, but we see clearly in Inside Out 2 how it becomes a problem when anxiety gets to be the boss. When anxiety gets to run the show, everything spirals. Things do not go well for Riley when anxiety is at the helm. So how do we figure out how to allow the anxiety that we feel and then work with it without letting it dominate? How can we relate to anxiety as not a problem to solve, but something to make space for? Right? What is anxiety there to teach us? What do we have to learn from anxiety? What does anxiety want for us? These are some good questions you can ask yourself. So anxiety can tend to crowd everything else out, just as it happens in Inside Out 2. But all of those other emotions are still there. We just have to figure out how to get them to play nicely together so that nobody's dominating. And then my favorite thing in Inside Out 2 is actually the idea of core beliefs, and how kind of in the beginning, in order for Riley to feel good, she's relating, or at least the characters are relating to Riley's core beliefs as though they have to be about perfection, right? That Riley has to believe she's good and amazing, and anything that is not reflective of her perfection gets tossed to the side so that it cannot become part of her core belief. But that's really not the way that it is, right? We can feel amazing about ourselves with lots of flaws. We do not need to be perfect to be valuable. Just like Riley's memories are a mix of joy and sadness and, all the feelings, our beliefs about ourselves can be a mix, right? They can be a mix about our strengths and our weaknesses, the things that we love about ourselves and the things that we don't, right? All of it can be what it is, and we can still feel really good about who we are. And so we see this transition where Riley sees, well, actually it's more of Riley's emotions kind of seeing it. I'm not sure if Riley actually sees it because the story is told from the perspective of her emotions, but we see how her emotions loosen up and realize, oh, okay, it's not about being perfect to believe that you're good enough. It's not about doing things right. It's about being human. It's about being authentic. It's about being who you are and treating yourself kindly. And I think that is a beautiful thing. I see that come up in a lot of the coaching work that I do, where kind of in the early stages sometimes of coaching, where my clients are learning that, their beliefs are just thoughts they've thought enough times that they don't have to try anymore. And they've thought them and they've gathered evidence for them. And so now they just feel true. And it's just kind of where their brain goes. And so the tendency can kind of be to whitewash is the word that's coming to mind. I don't know if that's the best word for it, but just to maybe sanitize is maybe a better word. They kind of feel like, if I'm going to truly, think that I'm good enough and worthy and I'm going to love myself and feel really good about who I am, then I just need to focus on all the goodness. I need to kind of downplay the stuff that I don't like, the stuff that I wish weren't there, those flaws and imperfections, any sort of darkness or shadow. And I need to focus on and highlight all the things that I think are amazing. And I need to pep talk myself into the amazing, right? And I always need to tell the story so that I am perfect. I need to avoid anything that is not that. And I did that myself too. I've done that before. So I totally understand what it is like to do that. And I'm going to tell you from experience, it's pretty miserable. It's very limited and it's not so much fun, right? When you can only feel good about yourself when you are quote unquote good, which who even knows what that means, but when you decide you know what good means, and then now you're only allowed to be that, and your self-concept is based on goodness, success, woof, I feel stressed just talking about it. As opposed to what it's like to just loosen up, to zoom out, to see ourselves as beautiful and flawed, because that's how humans are. That we can try things, and some of them will be successes, and some of them will be learning opportunities, flaming failures. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with us. It just means things don't always work out the way we wanted. Right? We can make mistakes and learn from them and extend grace and compassion to ourselves and carry on and not shame ourselves and not make it mean that we aren't good enough or that we're bad. Right? This is what I believe a healthy self-concept looks like, is room for humanness. And so in these movies, what we see is room for emotions. There's value in all of it. And room for humanness. Because that's what it's like to be a human on the planet. So specifically, Inside Out 2, emotions work best as a team. We don't want any one feeling being in charge all the time. No one feeling is superior. They all have value. They all belong. Let's make space for all of them. Just like puberty reshapes us, just like puberty catches us off guard and is messy and uncomfortable and disorienting and chaotic. So is grief. And both are chances to discover who we are and what matters to us next. Who are you going to be in this next iteration of you? What matters to you most in this next chapter of your life? We may not love puberty. We may not love grief. And they can change us in beautiful ways. Core beliefs do not need to come from perfect experiences. They come from real experiences, from love, from loss, from mistakes, from growth, from success, from failure. We don't need to believe that we are perfect to believe that we are valuable. And neither growth nor grief are linear. And that's okay. Because the messy parts are where the magic happens. So that's what I took from these two movies. I will probably watch them over and over and over again, continuing on into forever. One of the things I love about a good movie like this is that it's almost like the movie keeps changing even though it doesn't, because we change and we receive it differently. When we watch it again, we're somewhere else other than where we were in life. I know that obviously the first time I watched Inside Out, Hugo hadn't died. That was a long time ago. And so what that movie means to me now and how that movie has continued to evolve in what it means to me every time I watch it is something I cherish. And so I will keep watching these movies. And I encourage you to keep doing the same thing too. If you haven't seen them in a while, go back, rewatch. How do you relate to some of these pieces now because of your lived experience on this planet? Maybe it's different than it was. That's pretty cool. All right. That's what I have for you this week. Remember, I love you. You've got this. Go tell yourself that in the mirror if you need to. All right? Take care. I'll see you next week.